Great. So next, what we're going to be talking about, as Rupert alluded to in our introduction, is Project Big Picture. And Project Big Picture is the latest in, one of huge sort of football changes that a lot of people are sort of coming to terms with. And there's been a lot of stories that have sort of not very well described, and people are hearing this and that and only knowing the headlines. So we're just going to do a quick breakdown of what it is, and then sort of talk about why it's good, why it's bad, whether it's, something that's healthy for the league. So just kicking us off, what is Project Big Picture and why is it coming out now? Project Big Picture it's a massive shift in the terms of how revenue streams in English football operate. It looks to increase the share afforded to the EFL, which is the English Football League, so that's the Championship, League One and League Two, reduce the cost of away support, so there's a proposal to cap away tickets at £20, and provide funding to both the women's game and National League football, so that's the league below League Two, as well as National Leagues North and South, which is the sixth step.
It would also represent a significant administrative change in terms of both the league format and responsibilities. Two of the major changes would be a reduction in size of the Premier League from 20 teams to 18, like it is in the Bundesliga, as well as a change to the promotion and relegation processes between the top flight and the Championship.
Yeah, so in order to facilitate the 18-team reduction, we would see next season 4 teams go down from the Premiership and 2 teams come up from the Championship. And in following seasons, we would see 2 teams immediately relegated, and then the 16th place, which would be the third last in this 18-team system, would enter actually the playoffs. So the Championship playoffs would feature this person sort of playing for their right to stay in the Premier League, which I think actually sounds quite fun. But those are sort of the administrative changes. Aside from that, we've got a huge amount of money being dedicated towards the EFL. So we have 250 million immediately presented to the EFL, as well as a cumulative 100 million to the FA. That's in order to cover losses and support investment to the women's game. I think the figure being quoted is about £58 million invested into the women's game. The National League and grassroots football will also be receiving investment. And most interestingly, in the long term, the Premier League clubs would reduce their share of distributable revenue. At the moment, Premier League clubs receive distributable revenue from the English game at 92%, and they would reduce that to 75%, which would guarantee 25% to EFL clubs. Which, just to distill that into a sort of a more real figure, for teams in the Championship, each club would raise their income by 15.5 million a season. League One clubs would increase their income by 3.5 million a season, and League Two clubs would increase their income by 2.3 million pounds a season. And the reason this is so attractive at the moment, and arguably part of the reason why it's been quote unquote leaked right now, although we'll get into that in a bit, is because there's been an economic crisis in the EFL at the moment.
Sure.
The coronavirus pandemic has meant that there has been no fans coming to games. There has been a massive reduction in money coming into the game. And for a club like Man City or Liverpool or Chelsea, that's not the end of the world. It's certainly seen a lot of these clubs have to cut back and furlough their staff, but these clubs will still end up, running. Whereas a lot of the EFL clubs are in massive, massive crisis. League One bosses and League Two bosses have been saying that it's a matter of weeks till the clubs collapse. And so this represents, kind of a lifeline potentially for these EFL clubs.
It definitely does, but it also means that these clubs aren't operating in their best long-term interests. They look at, this package offer and say, these guys have agreed on actual numbers of what they're going to do to support us. The FA has talked about it, the Premier League has talked about it, but hasn't made any concrete distinctions. And we need money now. We need this. And that's why the chairman of the EFL has come out and supported it. But I don't think that it's dealing in good faith, because they are not in a position they're not in a good bargaining position at all. So I think they just want something that will help them, which they need and should be done. But all of this stuff that comes attached to that, I don't think is worth it for them.
Yeah, so this goes to sort of one of the more murky sides that more casual fans might not be so aware of. One thing that came out in the wake of this, quote-unquote leak since Sunday is that quite recently the EFL had been offered £375 million in exchange for a 20% stake by an American investment firm that the EFL as an organisation hadn't presented towards the clubs in the EFL and instead had turned down point blank. As it now comes out that Rick Parry, who is the chairman of the EFL and a former CEO of the Premier League, has been in talks with Liverpool and Man United as the principal dealers for the last 3 years, it starts to look a little bit murkier and a little bit more cynical. And if the question is, well, why would these clubs do this? Are they doing it just for, the reduction to 18 teams, as well as, the axing of the Carabao Cup and the Community Shield? There's actually a lot more at stake for these larger clubs. One of the larger things is that at the moment, any major change to Premier League rules, this change included, by the way, requires 14 votes. So every single club in the Premier League gets one vote, and it needs 14 in order to carry it. The current change that is being proposed by principally Manchester United and Liverpool, although it has been suggested that either Chelsea or Spurs are in bed with this deal as well, and the positions of Man City and Arsenal are as yet unclear, are looking to create a voting system whereby only 9 teams would have a vote in Premier League rule changes. This being the top 6 as we know it today, as well as the other 3 members that have been the longest serving in the Premier League, those being Everton, West Ham and Southampton. So it's kind of obvious to see why a lot of clubs, especially the other Premier League clubs outside of this group, are sort of have the hairs on the back of their neck raised, because it looks like a power grab, basically, disguised as sort of an amnesty package, especially if this other amnesty package has been concealed by the chairman of the EFL to sort of go, we'll help everyone out, but in exchange, we're throwing a coup. What do you think, Rubes, about, what this could mean for the future of the game?
Yeah, I mean, as you say, this would create a complete oligopoly of the big 6 clubs, including the 3 longest standing ones, having pretty much total control over the future of the Premier League and how it changes, and that makes me feel really nervous. And if you look at the other parts of it, like the rescue package and like the away tickets being capped at £20, it's clearly just such a ploy to try and get people on side and supporting it, so that they can slip through under the radar the other parts of the bill that would just completely shift the power dynamics of the Premier League. And the power dynamics of the Premier League at the moment are such that clubs get more equal money from their involvement and their TV rights, way more than Spain or Germany or Italy or France, for example. And as a result, the Premier League is so competitive. And
yeah, and that's
the
what we love
worry
about
is, from my perspective, that this money that is being promised to the EFL clubs on top of the rescue package, like the initial 250
the 25%
£100 million,
revenues,
those extra percentages will effectively create a crutch by which the Premier League will be obligated to support the rest of English football, and that will change in time. And these big clubs having control over new regulations will mean that will go away, I would imagine, in the next 20, 30 years, and they'll just be left with absolutely nothing. And this is just, it's the same thing as creating a European league. It's the same thing as really any sort of suggestion that big clubs should have more power than they already do. Mm-hmm. It just completely changes what is good about English football.
I agree with that, broadly speaking. I think that part of what, and maybe the biggest thing that makes the Premier League, for my money, the most entertaining league in the world, is that we can have these massive upsets, like, for example, Villa coming and putting 7 past the champions, or, West Brom scoring 3 against Chelsea in the first half before Chelsea have to, mount a comeback, and that's what makes the league so fantastically entertaining. And I do think as well that it, on the surface of it, you can look at it, and certainly the way that the EFL clubs have received it, because they're in no position to be turning down financial assistance, is like, this is a godsend, this is really generous, this is sort of the clubs all coming together in the name of football to help out. But actually, if you just start to scratch beneath the surface a little bit, it looks more and more like this is just, there's no other word for it other than hush money. It's basically just money to sort of rush through this way to get loads and loads of power for the top clubs. What I would say, just in terms of, playing devil's advocate, do you think that there's any case for the larger clubs to have more of a say? I think that anyone would agree that them having a total say, in terms of them then being 9 voters and the other 11 clubs not having any say, is just ridiculous. But do you think that there is a case for certainly the big 6 clubs to say, well, listen, we generate the majority of the revenue and the interest in this league. Most people, if they're not, Premier League fans, they tune in to watch, say, Chelsea versus Man United. They don't really tune in to watch Burnley versus Sheffield. Therefore, we should have more sway than these other clubs. Do you think that's fair? Or do you think that's just missing the point?
So the first thing I would say is, yes, it's down to 9 clubs. What we maybe didn't mention was that in order to get a rule passed, 6 of those clubs would need to support a change in legislation. So effectively, the top 6 clubs in English football could dictate changes for the entire Premier League if they wanted to. And
if they agreed on something, such as the Super League, for example, is something that's been floating around for the last few years.
Exactly. The other thing I would say is that the top 6 clubs are all foreign controlled by people in Russia, people in the Middle East, and personally, I get quite nervous about these large, often not faceless or nameless, but responsibilityless,
Mm.
um,
And often mysterious.
powerful backers dictating the Premier League processes. I think that way spells real danger.
Yeah, and I think that's a very good point you made there, because I think a lot of people will look at it and go, well, the top six can't really run away with it because you've got these three other teams, and Everton is certainly always looked towards as a really, community-faced club. West Ham have their ups and downs being run by the Dildo brothers, but, I think people think that maybe they'd be a counterweight, but you are right. If the top six could agree on something together and sort of form a cartel within that nine, they could just put a rule, pass it, and make as many changes as they want. And certainly, if it comes down to profit margin, you wouldn't necessarily have the greatest faith that owners of clubs like, the Mansours, Stan Kroenke, Fenway Sports Group will be acting in the best interest of the English fans ahead of what made the biggest margins.
Yeah, absolutely not. And I also think that tell me if I'm wrong, but if someone like West Ham or Southampton or Everton gets relegated, then they get replaced by the second longest standing club, right?
At present, yeah. If they got relegated from the Premier League, they would have their place replaced, yeah.
Yeah, so I mean there's nothing to suggest that Everton or West Ham or Southampton would keep them all in check, because we don't know if they're going to get relegated. I mean, I'm probably wrong, but I predicted West Ham to come 20th this year. They don't look like that, but they could get relegated any time, and I think it's the big six would control everything at that point.
Exactly. West Ham being in there is kind of like Ukraine being at the UN with Russia having a seat right behind them. Like, we're a voice of our own, and the big six are like, no, you aren't.
Yeah, and it's just it's the timing of it as well is so cynical, with these lower tier clubs clamoring for greater support, and also a large, growing feeling of dissent among fans that want cheaper, more affordable away day experiences. So
Yeah, definitely. And I think this is really important to mention as well, because it's another thing that contributes to the whole sort of like murky. When we talked about Newcastle, for example, in the takeover, one of the most frustrating aspects of it was the lack of transparency. And it's the same here, even though this is not even supposed to have been, released to the public. This has allegedly been leaked. But I think the timing of the leak is so convenient in tandem with both the £375 million, bid from the American investors for the EFL, and also the fact that at the moment we are at this sort of event horizon for so many EFL clubs. So many clubs are literal weeks away from collapsing that it almost feels like the leaking, as it were, was just Rick Parry going, oh no, I've left this on a desk in the living room. Hope nobody finds it. Because it's just so perfectly timed.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Any leaks that you get these days, like when the government leaks its new proposed plans and then tentatively sees how people feel about them before implementing them. It's obviously not done by mistake.
I think so, especially when you consider that this, according to The Athletic, this proposal was meant to hit the Premier League as early as April. That was the plan between, again, the three major players, Rick Parry, Liverpool and Manchester United. It was planned to be, launched this campaign in April. And then, of course, coronavirus happened and it was sort of set back. And it almost seems now like the best way to put it forward has just been not to almost make it look like a power grab, but to sort of let this very generous rewards package sort of glisten in this leaked document and just let that be what the EFL clubs focus on. Because to be fair to the EFL clubs, I mean, they need it. There are so many people who have sort of spoken out in support of it. Paul Scally, the chairman of, Gillingham, came out and said it was the most attractive solution for the EFL. And he said, look, this is a group that, even if you don't like the way they're doing it, are doing something for the EFL. They haven't been the ones, obviously alluding to the Premier League, who have sat around and done nothing for 6 months to support us. The Fleetwood Town chairman, Andy Pilley, described it as a fantastic proposal that will save EFL clubs from oblivion, because that is what they're facing, just the end. And I think the Premier League have kind of failed here in a lot of ways. They've been allowed, the rug has been pulled from under them, but only because they've allowed it to be.
Yeah, and I think the one positive that could come from this is hopefully the Premier League and the FA turn around and go, whoa, we really need to address this, and we really need to support these clubs so that they don't have to support something which is not good for them long term. as I said again, I said it before, I'll say it again. These clubs are not operating from a position of strength in terms of bargaining power. They
No.
have no choice but to support the one thing that, while it might destroy them in the future, will save them for the next maybe 10 years. So I don't think that you can take EFL support like seriously in terms of how good it's going to be for them.
Well, this is the other thing is that, obviously the very attractive parts of it are the short-term injection of 250 million and then more long-term, the 25% of distributable revenue. But there are also several other changes that they want to implement. For example, they'd like to introduce a salary cap to the Championship, League One and League Two. They want these clubs to now, be compliant with UEFA-style FFP regulations. So this would, potentially mean that clubs like Brentford, for example, or Fulham wouldn't be able to have, big money owners come in and start investing large amounts of money, or Sheffield United, for example. If there was a salary cap and financial fair play regulations. So we would not see, the emergence of some of these sides that have come in and started investing a lot of money, which, depending on how you stand as a fan, could be better or could be worse. But, from my perspective, I think it's always interesting when new players can join the game.
Yeah, agreed. No, I don't think, I just don't think we can, this should be a thing that happens, and you really hope that the Premier League and the FA can respond well.
Yeah, I mean, this is the thing, though. It's like, it's a power struggle between this top six club cabal, or at least United, Liverpool, and one of Spurs or Chelsea. The story keeps changing, and the Premier League. But there's not really a good guy and a bad guy on this side. It's kind of just two bad guys slugging it out.
Well, yeah, that's true.
And the difference is that one bad guy at least is offering some help, maybe hindrance in the long term, but at the moment it's going to do more for them than the Premier League is doing. So, it's a very tricky situation, and I can understand entirely why, if you ran an EFL club, or you supported an EFL club, or you played for an EFL club, you would be fully behind this, but it could be a bit of a poison chalice.
Yeah, very true. So, I'm sure we'll be talking about this more in the coming weeks as details come out, things unfold, but definitely one to watch, and a very sinister move by big clubs.
Yeah, no, definitely one that we'll be keeping an eye on, and I don't think that we'll have a happy ending to this. I think it's going to get continually nastier and nastier. There's a lot of money involved. There are some big players that are used to getting their own ways, and in this league. And I think we might really see. I mean, Rick Parry has already spoken about the ability of any club to resign from the English Football League, and we might see some resignations even from the top teams. Because if the top six clubs get together and have their plot foiled, as it were, they might just decide now's the time to, pack up our bags and go and make a try of this Super League. So it really could be. I heard it described earlier today as potentially the biggest thing to happen to English football since the formation of the Premier League, and I really think that that's what this could represent. At the moment,
not to be
it's
underestimated for sure.
Yeah. I think at the moment it's being viewed as just something very hypothetical, but I think it's been leaked on purpose. It's something that the wheels are in motion, and things are going to start moving very quickly from this point.
I mean, wheels are definitely in motion. I mean, this is at least a 3-year plan, as we talked about. So, this is the point where they've come public with it, and it's go time. They're already, like 4 stages into their plan rather than starting from scratch.